So we'll start out first question for voters who may not know who you are. Just kind of briefly introduce yourself, your background, why you're running for Congress, and what makes you qualified to represent them.
Oh, sure, Brett. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name's Mark Ambrose, running for the 11th District, right? Most of southern Oakland County, south of Clarkston. Grew up in the area, went to Brother Rice High School, then went to West Point and served as an armor officer over in Korea and here back at home at Fort Knox and some other places as well. After that, I'd gone to graduate school and received an MBA from Columbia University, as well as a Master of International Affairs. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that George Stephanopoulos was actually a professor of mine. So then after that, I worked in banking for about 24 years. I'm a chartered financial analyst. So I mention all of those things not to put everyone in your audience to sleep, but just to mention that I have a background that can address some of the issues of the day. The thing that drove me to run for office, I saw how all of our kids suffered during the pandemic. I have a son who's autistic. And I remember coming home about 7 months into the pandemic, and Patrick was lying on our kitchen floor in front of a laptop computer doing sit-ups for his Zoom physical education class. And I thought this is the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen, but we had no way to control it, right? These are decisions being made outside of our family and being forced upon us. And I thought at that time that so many of these decisions are being made by one person, and they're circumventing the legislature, who should really be setting the rules that we live by. And I wanted to be part of making sure that never happened again, that the legislature, our elected officials, are the ones who create the laws that we live by.
So I guess first question, get into the issues. One that's in a recent Pew Research poll voters found most important was the economy.
Yes.
Inflation, is at the highest it's been in decades. It's affecting people at the gas pump, the grocery store. What do you believe can be done and should be done to bring that under control?
Well, so it's interesting. A lot of the rhetoric coming from the administration is that this is a global problem, it was unavoidable, it was Russia's fault. No, we've made some really bad decisions that took us here. So there are a few parts to that. One is irresponsible spending. So if you remember, there was $1.9 trillion that was voted in on a strict party line vote back in March of 2021. Larry Summers, who is a Democrat economist, warned this is the most irresponsible piece of legislation in a generation. And all the Democrats voted for it, including Haley Stevens, right? And so that put kerosene onto the fire of inflation and just made it so much worse than it is elsewhere in the developed world, especially the core rate of inflation. The other thing that we've done badly is our energy policy. Energy has a trickle effect through the economy and makes everything more expensive as you're transporting goods. We have not developed the resources that we have in this country. I'm a big proponent of alternative energy sources, but it's not right for everybody at this time, and we need to make sure that's one component, but then we're also energy independent. The last piece I'll mention is fiscal policy, not fiscal policy, but the monetary policy. So what we found is the Federal Reserve became way too politicized, right? If you remember a year ago, there was this talk about, inflation's transitory, and they weren't raising rates at the time they should have. They were parroting the talking points of the administration. Those people should be above politics, and we need to make sure that we're putting people on the Federal Reserve Board who are not simply going to mimic the talking points of the administration.
And one of the other issues that was most important to voters on this poll, I think 6 out of 10 said violent crime is one of the things that they're focused on in this 2022 congressional election. So what do you think Congress should do or could do to make voters feel safer?
Well, number one, we need to make sure that we stop this crazy rhetoric about defund the police. We need to support law enforcement across the board, whether it's at the border or in our communities. We need to make sure that we're doing that. We need to stop permissive bail laws, right? You remember this horrible story of what happened in Harper Woods when somebody who was accused of beating and torturing his girlfriend was released from jail on $10,000 bail. And within 3 days, allegedly, he killed that same girlfriend, right? That should never happen in this society. That person should have been locked up until trial. So we need to stop those. And also what we need to do, I was chatting with Sheriff Bouchard earlier this summer about this, the National Instant Criminal Background Check, right? So if somebody's a felon, they shouldn't be allowed to buy a handgun. Only 1.5 of those attempts by felons to buy handguns or any type of a gun is actually prosecuted. We need to prosecute those and keep guns out of criminals' hands.
You mentioned, some gun issues there. Speaking just in general about gun control, what do you think should be changed, if anything, about current gun control laws in this country?
Well, I think we need to enforce the laws that are in the books, number one, right? So I was mentioning the fact that we don't prosecute enough of those folks who are felons who are applying for it. There are also 7 million felons who should be on that criminal background checklist who are not currently. We need to fix that database and make sure that those people cannot get a hold of a firearm. And then I would just reiterate the fact that we need to keep these permissive bail laws out there. Those people who have a tendency to violence need to be kept in jail and not released. And that's something that's a real problem with very liberal DAs across the country.
Another big issue in this election cycle is abortion. After the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it's kind of become also a bit of a state issue. It's on the ballot here, Proposal 3 in Michigan. But I guess, first of all, what are your thoughts or views on abortion? And do you think this should be something that should be up to the federal government to be up to the federal government to make decisions?
Well, I think you brought up a great point, right? So Roe v. Wade was overturned, turning it back to the states. This is now a question of our democracy. So my say in this would be no more than any other citizen of Michigan, right? We get to decide on November 8th the rules that we want to live by here. I am pro-life. I'm pro-life with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. But I'll have a vote just as every other citizen will have a vote. I think broadly we need to do a better job in this country to try to find common ground on this issue. We need to make sure that we educate our young people and try to avoid unwanted pregnancies to the greatest extent possible.
And when it comes to infrastructure, what do you think are some investments that need to be made in Michigan, and what would you do to make those happen in Michigan?
Well, certainly our roads are a complete mess, right? That's not a question really that anybody debates. I think that we need to make sure that we invest there. Whatever federal dollars are available, I would want to make sure that Michigan got its fair share for the roads and bridges across the state. And I think something we need to do a better job as well is to make sure that the infrastructure is available, or that there are quick decisions in terms of encouraging companies to come to Michigan rather than to go to Tennessee or Kentucky, like we saw happen actually under this administration when I think Ford and GM both had some battery plants that went down there instead of considering Michigan.
Are there any other big issues that you wanted to touch upon here? Anything else you wanted to add? And I guess anything else you want voters to know ahead of this election?
Sure. One thing that's a concern with a lot of folks is the whole idea of illegal immigration. So I want to start off by saying I am a very strong proponent of legal immigration. If people want to come to this country and follow the processes, I'm 100% behind that. The problem that I have is when we have a border where we don't know who's coming across is a real issue. So when I was in the Army Reserve, I had served down in Douglas, Arizona. Sleepy little town that not many people have heard of. My soldiers went out on patrol with the Border Patrol. They found human remains. They also, there were 4 shootings in this town while I was there, 2 murders. And it's absolutely out of control. This was back in 2004. It's become exponentially worse. So this administration, and frankly, Haley Stevens, as well as Democrats, have allowed this to happen. They need to take a stand on securing that border and making sure that we know who's coming in and that we can control that. It's bad for the U.S. citizens who are here, and it's bad for the illegal immigrants who come across too, like the 52 who died in the back of a trailer truck. That kind of really dangerous thing where you're putting the coyotes in charge of all of these very vulnerable lives is something that we can't allow to continue, and it's irresponsible, the administration, the Democratic House, to allow this to continue.